If you're in the middle of buying a home and your lender asked you for a letter to explain something, your first instinct might be to panic, but this is not a sign that something is wrong. Most letters of explanation, which is what we call them, or an LOE, are completely routine. In fact, after doing this for more than 20 years, helping families buy homes, I've asked for them on the vast majority of the loans that I've worked on. I had a client recently who became convinced that their loan was about to fall apart because I needed a little more information, and she was almost in tears. When you're buying a home, every email from your lender feels important. So when you see a request for more paperwork, it's natural to wonder if something went wrong. Nothing was wrong with the loan. We simply needed to explain something that the paperwork couldn't. Here's the thing about your loan application. It's numbers, it's documents, that's it. It doesn't come with a story. And when something on that application doesn't add up on its own, we need you to tell us what's actually going on. That's what a letter of explanation is. It's not a red flag. It's you filling in the story that your paperwork doesn't tell on its own. My name is Candy. I'm a loan officer, and I've been doing this for over 20 years. So today, I'm walking you through exactly what these letters are, why we ask for them, and what you actually need to know if you ever get one of these requests. So let's actually define this thing. A letter of explanation is exactly what it sounds like. It's a written explanation from you, the borrower, about something in your file that isn't completely clear from your application and your supporting documents like the pay stubs, W-2, credit report. So I want you to picture something. Imagine an underwriter sitting at a desk with two computer monitors full of documents. They've never met you. They've never talked to you. They don't know your story. All they have are numbers, bank statements, credit reports, pay stubs, tax returns. These documents tell them what happened. They don't tell them why. That's where a letter of explanation comes in. You're simply filling in the part of the story your paperwork can't tell. So let's say a credit inquiry shows up on your credit report. The underwriter sees that inquiry. What they don't see is why or what happened afterward. Was that a car loan, a store credit card? Were you rate shopping for your mortgage? Did you open a new account that's not showing up on the credit report? The letter of explanation is where you tell us which one it actually is. The underwriter isn't trying to catch you doing something wrong. They're trying to understand the full picture so they can confidently say yes to your loan. And in my 20 plus years of doing this, I've asked for these letters on the majority of the files I've worked. It is standard. It is expected. It is not a sign that your file is in trouble. So now that you understand what it is and why we ask for it, let's get into these specific situations where you're most likely to see one of these requests, because some of these come up in almost every single file and some of them are a little more unexpected. So let's start with the ones you're almost guaranteed to run into. These show up in the majority of the files, so if you get asked about one of these, this is not unusual. It's just a Tuesday. The first one is credit inquiries. We're going to need an explanation for them. It doesn't matter if you've had one or five. And here's what the underwriter is worried about. They want to make sure that you're not opening new credit accounts or taking on new debt right before you close on your mortgage, because that new debt could change your qualifying numbers. To avoid this, be sure to tell your loan officer if you've opened any new credit recently, because it may not be showing up on the credit report yet. So what do you actually say? It's usually this simple. I was shopping rates for my mortgage and applied with a couple of different lenders before choosing this one. Or I applied for a car loan on this date and decided not to move forward with it. That's it. That's the whole letter. You're not writing an essay. You're just filling in the blank. The second common one is address changes that show up on your credit report. Maybe you moved, maybe there's an old address still floating around from a few years ago. Underwriters want to verify your current living situation and make sure everything lines up. So the explanation here is just as simple. I moved from this address to this address on this date, done. Here's what you want to take away. If you get a request for a letter about credit inquiries or an address change, this is not your file falling apart. This is routine. I would go as far to say that this is expected on almost every file I touch. So if this is the kind of request you got, take a breath. You're fine. But there are some other situations that can come up a little less often. And these are the ones that tend to catch people off guard because, unfortunately, unlike the credit inquiries, which usually get flagged early, these other ones sometimes don't show up until later in your transaction. So let's get into those next. The first one is employment gaps or job changes. Maybe you switched companies recently. Maybe there was a period of time when you weren't working. Underwriters are looking at your employment history because they want to verify that your income is stable and consistent. So if there's a gap, they need to know why. What do you say? Keep it simple and honest. I was actively searching for a job from this date to this date, or I stayed home to take care of a family member from this date to this date, or I started my current position on this date and here's what I'm earning now. Job changes happen and underwriters understand that. It's just a fact they need documented. The second one, and this one is a little more personal, is something like a short-term disability or health-related income change. And I want to tell you about a client I had because this one really stuck with me. We were partway through her transaction when I found out that she was on short-term disability. And I hadn't known that going in because the pay stubs I had didn't show that. And she didn't tell me. So when this came up, I started asking questions about it to get the documentation that we needed. And she thought this meant that something was wrong with her loan and she started panicking. So I stopped and I told her directly, this is not going to be a problem. This is just going to mean a little more paperwork. And I watched her relax in real time because she thought asking questions meant something was falling apart. Here's the truth. Underwriters need to understand your income. And if part of that income was affected by a short-term disability, they just need to see that it's temporary and that things are back to normal or on track to being back to normal. The letter is straightforward. I am on short-term disability from this date to this date. I plan to return to work on this date. That's it. It's a quick explanation. The third curveball is income inconsistencies. Maybe you have deposits in your bank account that don't match your stated income. Could be a gift from a family member, could be side income, could be normal fluctuations if you're self-employed. Underwriters aren't trying to catch you doing something wrong here either. They're just verifying that you can actually afford this mortgage long term. So depending on the situation, you might need a gift letter or a quick explanation of where that deposit came from or additional documentation if you're self-employed and your income moves around month to month. Here's the thread that connects all three of these though. They tend to show up later in the process. And that's exactly why I like to ask about these things up front during pre-qualification instead of waiting for them to surface halfway through your transaction when you're already stressed about inspections and appraisals and everything else going on. That being said, just because you haven't been asked about it doesn't mean you shouldn't bring it up. If you're unsure about something in your application, ask about it at the beginning. Now let's talk about why that upfront approach actually matters. Here's my philosophy on all of this. I would rather ask you about every single one of these things during pre-qualification than have it show up as a surprise later. Think back to that story that I told you. Finding out about the short-term disability partway through the transaction is what caused the panic. The timing. If we had covered that up front before she was already deep into the stress of buying a house, it would have been just one more thing we had handled early on and moved past. That's the whole point of asking these questions during pre-qualification instead of waiting for them to come up later. I'm not asking because I'm nosy. I'm asking because I want your entire home buying experience from the moment you start looking to the moment you close to be about finding the right house, not scrambling to explain something that could have been handled 3 weeks earlier while you're also worried about your inspection and your appraisal and everything else that's happening at the same time. Keep in mind, most of what triggers a letter of explanation isn't unpredictable. Credit inquiries, address changes, employment history, those are things we can ask about right up front. So when we ask a lot of questions, that's not us being difficult, that's us trying to protect you from exactly this kind of last minute panic I just described. So now that you understand the why, let's actually talk about the how, because if you do get asked for one of these letters, you might be sitting there wondering what you're even supposed to write. So let's say you've gotten the request, you're staring at the email that says you need a letter of explanation, and you're not sure what that actually looks like. Here's the good news. It doesn't need to be fancy. It doesn't need to be formal. You are just answering the question you are asked. Here's what a good letter of explanation includes: what you're explaining, the relevant dates or time frame, and if it applies, why the situation is resolved or ongoing. So let me give you a few examples so you can see how simple this actually is. For credit inquiry, it might read something like this. I applied for a mortgage with another lender on this date and received a couple of credit inquiries while I was rate shopping. I decided to move forward with my current lender based on the best rate and terms. For an address change, it's even shorter. I relocated from this address to this address on this date. For an employment gap, something like this. I was actively searching for a new position from this month to this month. I started my current role on this date, and my income has returned to this amount. That's really all there is to it. You're not trying to impress anyone with your writing. You're just telling the quick and clear story behind the numbers so the underwriter has the full picture instead of a blank space. So here's what I want you to walk away with this. A letter of explanation is not a problem. It's not a red flag. It's just a story. Your application is numbers and documents, and every once in a while, those numbers and documents need a little context to make sense. That's all this is. My job, and honestly, any good loan officer's job, is to understand what is actually happening in your file and making sure that the underwriter can understand it without picking up the phone to ask. So if you got one of these requests and you're sitting there trying to figure out exactly what to write, drop your questions in the comments. I read every single one of them. And if you want to talk through your specific situation with someone who's not going to make you feel like something went wrong, you can book some time on my calendar. I'm here to help.